The war had lasted 12 years. 12 years of blood and fire and death. 12 years of watching human colonies fall one by one to the Valderan Empire. Grace Collins remembered every single day of it. She stood at the window of the diplomatic building in Geneva, watching the rain fall on the old city. Behind her, Admiral Henry Brooks sat at his desk with tired eyes and a folder in his hands. He had not spoken for a long time. Grace knew that meant bad news. "They want peace," Brooks finally said. Grace turned around. "The Valderan want peace? After 12 years of trying to destroy us?" "That is what they say." Brooks opened the folder and pushed it across the desk. "But there is a condition. A strange one." Grace walked over and looked at the documents. Her eyes moved across the words and her face grew pale. "A marriage? They want a human to marry one of their own. They call it Vethkai, a sacred bonding ritual. They say it will seal the peace between our peoples forever." Brooks rubbed his eyes. "They have already chosen the one they will send. A male named Cale Verthan. We know nothing about him. And who do they want from our side?" Brooks looked at her with something like sadness in his eyes. "Someone who speaks their language. Someone who understands their culture. Someone who lost enough in this war to want it to end." He paused. "They asked for you, Grace." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She thought of her brother Daniel, killed 3 years ago when the Valderan bombed his ship. She thought of all the funerals she had attended, all the families she had watched fall apart. "If I do this," she said slowly, "the war ends? All of it?" "That is what they promise." Grace closed her eyes. She had given everything to this war. Her youth. Her peace of mind. Her brother. What was one more sacrifice? "When do I meet him?" she asked. The meeting took place 3 days later on a space station in neutral territory. Grace wore a simple blue dress. Her hands would not stop shaking, so she kept them behind her back. The Valderan delegation arrived first. They were tall and thin, with pale gray skin and silver markings that flowed across their faces like rivers. Their eyes were large and dark, and they moved with a grace that made humans look clumsy. Then he came. Cale Verthan walked behind the others like a shadow. He was taller than the rest, but he held himself like he wanted to disappear. His silver markings were dull, almost faded. His eyes stared at the floor and never looked up. Grace noticed the scars first. They circled his wrists like bracelets. More scars climbed up his neck and vanished beneath his ceremonial robes. These were not battle wounds. Someone had done this to him on purpose. The lead Valderan diplomat, a female named High Speaker Veloreth, smiled without warmth. "This is Cale Verthan. He is a gift from the Valderan Empire to humanity. He will serve as your peace consort." A gift. The word made Grace feel sick. They spoke about him like he was furniture. "May I speak with him?" Grace asked. Veloreth's smile flickered. "He does not speak much. His mind is simple, but he will be obedient." Grace ignored her and walked toward Cale. She stopped in front of him and waited. Slowly, very slowly, he lifted his eyes to meet hers. There was nothing simple in those eyes. Grace saw pain so deep it had no bottom. She saw fear and shame and something else. Something that might have been hope, buried under years of suffering. "Hello, Cale," she said softly. "My name is Grace." He did not answer, but his eyes stayed on her face, and she thought she saw his shoulders relax just a little. The ceremony happened 1 week later. Grace stood in a white room surrounded by diplomats and generals from both sides. Cale stood across from her in black robes that covered his scars. The ritual was simple. They pressed their palms together while the High Speaker spoke words in ancient Valderan. Grace felt something strange when their skin touched. A pulse of energy, like electricity but warmer. It traveled up her arm and settled in her chest. Cale showed no reaction. His face remained empty. But Grace noticed his hand trembling against hers. When it was over, the High Speaker announced that the war was finished. Humanity and the Valdaran Empire were now at peace. People cheered. Diplomats shook hands. Somewhere, Grace knew, soldiers were putting down their weapons. She should have felt happy. Instead, she felt hollow. They gave her and Cale a small house outside New Chicago. It had a garden and a view of the lake. It looked like a home, but it felt like a prison. Cale did not speak during the entire trip to Earth. He sat in the transport ship with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes on the floor. Grace tried to talk to him several times, but he only shook his head. That first night, Grace could not sleep. She lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering what she had gotten herself into. Around midnight, she heard a sound from the living room. She got up quietly and walked down the hall. Cale stood at the window, looking up at the stars. The moonlight made his silver markings glow faintly. He looked like a ghost. Grace was about to go back to her room when he spoke. His voice was rough, like he had not used it in a very long time. They did not send me to make peace. Grace froze. What? Cale kept staring at the stars. They sent me to die far from home. I am not a gift, Grace Collins. I am garbage they wanted to throw away. He turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than emptiness in his eyes. She saw anger, and underneath that, a terrible sadness. I am sorry, he whispered. You deserve better than me. Grace stood there in the dark, watching this broken stranger, and felt her heart crack open. She did not know what the Valdaran had done to him. She did not know why they hated him so much, but she knew one thing for certain. She was going to find out. 6 months passed like slow water. Grace learned many things about her strange husband during that time. She learned that he never slept in the bed. Every night, she found him curled up on the floor beside the window, watching the stars like a prisoner watching the sky. She learned that he did not eat unless she reminded him. Food seemed to confuse him, as if he had forgotten that his body needed it. She learned that loud noises made him flinch, that he spent hours sitting completely still, barely breathing. That sometimes, late at night, she heard him crying in his room, but knew he would never admit it. Grace did not push him. She simply stayed close. She made him breakfast every morning and sat with him while he ate. She told him stories about Earth, about the oceans and the mountains and the cities full of people. He never responded, but she saw him listening. One evening, she came home with a pile of old books about Valdaran culture. She had been searching for answers, and what she found made her blood run cold. Cale, she said, sitting down across from him at the kitchen table. I need to ask you something. He looked up. His eyes were always tired now, like carrying his own head was too much work. The Vethkai ceremony, Grace continued. I read about it today. It is not a peace ritual, is it? Cale's face changed. For a moment, fear flashed across his features before he pushed it down. No, he admitted. It is not. Then what is it? He was quiet for a long time. Grace waited. She had learned that patience was the only key to reaching him. The Vethkai is for disgraced warriors, he finally said. Those who have brought shame upon their families and their people. It binds them to an exile, a final punishment before death. Grace felt her hand shaking. They sent you here to be punished? They sent me here to be forgotten. Cale looked at his scarred wrists. I was once a Valkith. Do you know what that means? Grace shook her head. We are born with power, Cale explained. The ability to touch minds, to move objects with thought, to destroy. He closed his eyes. I was one of the strongest Valkith ever born. My commanders used me as a weapon. I burned cities. I killed thousands. His voice broke, but he kept going. 3 years ago, They sent me to destroy a human colony on a moon called Varus 7. When I arrived, I found the soldiers had already fled. Only civilians remained. Women, children, old people too sick to run. Grace's heart hammered in her chest. My commanders ordered me to kill them all, to leave no witnesses. Cale opened his eyes, and Grace saw tears running down his gray cheeks. I refused. I could not do it. I looked at those children, and I saw innocent lives, not enemies. What happened? Grace whispered. My own people arrested me. They called me a traitor. They tortured me for months, trying to break my mind. He touched the back of his neck. Then they put a device in my spine. A neural inhibitor. It burned away my connection to my power. It made me empty. Grace felt tears running down her own face now. She reached across the table and took his hand. He flinched but did not pull away. You saved those children, she said. You gave up everything to protect innocent people. That does not make you a traitor, Cale. That makes you a hero. He stared at her like she had spoken a language he did not understand. I am broken, Grace. I am nothing now. You are not nothing. She squeezed his hand tighter. You chose mercy when it cost you everything. That makes you stronger than any power. For the first time since she had known him, Cale smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it was real. A single tear fell from his eye and landed on their joined hands. I do not deserve your kindness, he said. Let me decide what you deserve. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands across the table while the sun set outside. Grace felt something shift between them. A door opening, just a crack. She did not know that others were watching. Senator Ruth Palmer had never trusted the peace treaty. She sat in her office in Washington, looking at a classified report about Cale Verthen. The report included everything. His powers, his crimes, his punishment. He could be useful, she said to the general standing beside her desk. If we remove the inhibitor, he becomes a weapon again. A weapon. The device is fused to his spine, the general replied. Removing it could kill him. Then we study him first. Learn how his powers work. Palmer smiled coldly. Either way, he does not belong to the Valdarin anymore. He belongs to us. She reached for her phone to make the call, but before she could dial, every alarm in the building started screaming. Grace and Cale heard the sirens at the same time. They rushed outside and saw people running in the streets. Military vehicles raced past. Someone was shouting about the sky. Grace looked up and felt her heart stop. Ships filled the horizon. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Valdarin warships, more than she had ever seen in one place. No, Cale whispered beside her. His face had gone pale. No. Grace grabbed his arm. What is it? What is happening? They lied, he said, his voice hollow. The peace was never real. They used the treaty to rebuild their forces. And now they have come to finish what they started. As they watched, the first bombs began to fall on the distant city. Fire rose into the clouds. Screams echoed across the water. The war had not ended. It had only just begun. The bunker was 50 meters underground. Grace and Cale sat in a small room with gray walls and a dozen screens showing the destruction above. Every screen told the same story. Fire, death, defeat. The Valdarin fleet was massive. 3 times larger than anything humanity had faced before. Cities fell in hours. London, Tokyo, Cairo, the name scrolled across the bottom of the screens like a list of the dead. General Victor Hayes stood at the center of the command room, shouting orders into a radio. His face was covered in sweat. His hands were shaking. He was a soldier who had fought the Valdarin for 20 years, and Grace could see in his eyes that he knew the truth. Humanity was losing. We need more time, Hayes said to his officers. The orbital defense grid is charging. If we can hold them for 6 more hours, we might have a chance. We do not have 6 hours, someone replied. Their ground forces are already landing. New Chicago will fall within the hour. Grace watched Cale's face as the reports came in. He sat completely still, his eyes fixed on the screens. She could not tell what he was thinking. His expression was a mask of stone. The door opened, and Hayes walked toward them. He looked at Cale like a man looking at a last hope. "I know who you are," the general said. "I know what you were. A Valkith, one of the most powerful warriors in the galaxy." He leaned closer. "We need you to fight." Cale did not look away from the screens. "I cannot or will not. The inhibitor destroyed my power. There is nothing left." Grace touched Cale's arm. She felt him trembling beneath his clothes. Hayes turned to a man standing in the corner. Dr. Nathan. Cole was a xenobiologist who had been studying Valdaran physiology for years. His face looked pale and excited at the same time. "Tell them," Hayes ordered. Cole stepped forward, holding a tablet. "I examined Cale yesterday. The inhibitor in his spine is failing." Cale's head snapped up. "What?" "The device was designed for a normal Valdaran nervous system. But your power was never normal. It has been burning through the inhibitor for years, slowly destroying it." Cole showed them a scan of Cale's spine. "Your abilities are returning. Slowly, but they are there." Grace felt hope rise in her chest. But Cale's face only grew more afraid. "You do not understand," Cale said. "Even if the inhibitor fails, using that power again could kill me. My nervous system is damaged. It cannot handle the energy anymore. So you might die," Hayes said bluntly. "Billions will definitely die if you do nothing. I think the math is simple, Victor." Grace stood up and faced the general. "He is not a weapon. He is a person. You cannot force him to kill himself for you. I am not forcing anyone. I am asking." Hayes turned back to Cale. "Will you help us or not?" Cale was silent. His eyes went back to the screens. The images showed Valdaran soldiers marching through burning streets, human defenders falling back, hospitals overflowing, families running with nowhere to go. Then the broadcast changed. A face appeared on every screen. Gray skin, cold eyes, silver markings that glowed with power. Grace felt Cale go rigid beside her. "People of Earth," the Valdaran said, "I am High Marshal Drevkin. Your resistance is meaningless. Your species will be erased from this galaxy." Cale stood up so fast his chair fell over. His hands were balled into fists. "You know him," Grace said. "He was my commander." Cale's voice was barely a whisper. "He gave the order to destroy Varus 7. He was the one who tortured me when I refused." Drevkin continued speaking. "Some of you may believe that peace is still possible, that the Vethkai ceremony was real." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "We sent you our garbage. A broken traitor we were too merciful to kill. Did you really think that meant we wanted peace?" Grace grabbed Cale's hand and held on tight. "To prove that mercy is weakness," Drevkin said, "I will now show you what happens to those who surrender." The screen changed again. It showed a group of children. Human children, maybe 50 of them, lined up in a row with their hands bound. Valdaran soldiers stood behind them with weapons raised. "These are survivors from your colony on Mars," Drevkin explained. "They surrendered peacefully, believing we would spare them. They were wrong." A soldier raised his weapon toward the first child, a little girl with brown hair and tears on her face. "No," Cale breathed. "Please," the girl cried on screen. "I want my mommy." Something inside Cale snapped. Grace felt it happen. A pulse of energy exploded from him, so strong that it knocked her backward. The lights in the bunker flickered. The screens crackled with static. When she looked at Cale, She saw his silver markings glowing brighter than she had ever seen. His eyes had turned white. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire. "Kale," she whispered. He looked at her, and she saw the pain in his face. He was already hurting. The power was already burning him from the inside. "I am sorry, Grace," he said. "I cannot watch this again. I could not save them before, but I can try now." He walked toward the door. "You might die," she called after him. He stopped but did not turn around. "Then at least I will die trying to protect someone. That is more than they ever let me do." He opened the door and stepped into the darkness beyond. Grace wiped her tears and ran after him. Kale walked out of the bunker and into a world on fire. The sky above New Chicago burned orange and red. Valderan dropships fell through the clouds like metal rain. The sound of explosions never stopped. Soldiers tried to block his path. Grace shouted at them to stand down. They looked at the glowing alien walking toward the battlefield and stepped aside. Kale stopped in the middle of a ruined street. Buildings burned around him. Smoke filled his lungs. Somewhere close, he could hear people screaming for help. He closed his eyes. The inhibitor had been a cage around his mind for 3 years. Now that cage was broken. He could feel his power rushing back like a river breaking through a dam. It hurt. Every nerve in his body screamed in protest. He felt like his blood was boiling, but underneath the pain, he felt something else. Strength, purpose, freedom. He opened his eyes and looked up at the nearest Valderan warship. It was massive, half a kilometer long, raining fire down on the city below. Hundreds of his former people waited inside. Kale raised his hand. The ship stopped firing. For a moment, it just hung in the sky, silent and confused. Then it began to shake. Metal groaned. Windows shattered with a sound like thunder. The ship tore itself apart. Pieces fell into the lake, sending up mountains of water. The Valderan inside never had a chance. Kale did not stop. He reached out again and grabbed another ship with his mind. Then another. Then another. One by one, the warships fell from the sky. Explosions lit up the clouds like lightning. Debris rained down on the empty streets. The human soldiers watched in stunned silence. They had never seen anything like this. One man against an entire fleet. One mind against the might of an empire. Grace watched from the bunker entrance, tears streaming down her face. She could see Kale glowing brighter with every ship he destroyed. She could also see the blood running from his nose and ears. He was killing himself to save them. On the ground, Valderan soldiers finally noticed what was happening. A squad of 20 turned their weapons toward Kale and fired. The energy blast stopped in midair, inches from his skin. They hung there for a moment, glowing and helpless. Then they reversed direction and flew back toward the soldiers who fired them. But they did not kill. The blast struck weapons and armor, shattering them into pieces. The Valderan soldiers fell to the ground, alive but defenseless. Kale walked past them without looking. "He is not killing them," General Hayes said in the command center, staring at the screens. "Why is he not killing them?" Grace appeared beside him, breathless from running. "Because he is not like them. He never was." Kale moved through the city like a storm. Wherever Valderan soldiers gathered, he scattered them. Wherever dropships landed, he threw them back into the sky. He did not need to touch anything. His mind was his weapon, and his will was stronger than steel. But the pain was getting worse. Every time he used his power, it felt like fire burning through his veins. His vision was starting to blur. His hands were shaking so badly, he could barely keep them raised. The inhibitor had damaged him more than he knew. His body was not meant to hold this much energy anymore. High above the earth, Drevkan watched the destruction of his forces with cold fury. His command ship sat at the back of the fleet, protected by 100 escorts. He had believed this invasion would be easy. He had believed humanity was already broken. He had not believed Kael'Verthin still had any fight left in him. All ships, Drevkin ordered. Target the traitor. Fire everything. The remaining Valdaran fleet turned as one. Hundreds of weapons locked onto a single glowing figure in the streets of New Chicago. Then they fired. Kael looked up and saw death falling toward him. Missiles, energy beams. Enough firepower to level a continent. He thought of Grace. He thought of the children he had saved on Varus 7. He thought of the little girl on the screen, crying for her mother. He would not let them die. Kael spread his arms and created a barrier above the city. The attacks struck it like hammers hitting glass. The barrier cracked. Kael screamed in pain. Blood poured from his eyes and nose. His silver markings flickered and dimmed dot, but the barrier held. The bombardment lasted for 30 seconds. It felt like 30 years. When it finally stopped, Kael fell to his knees. He could barely see. He could barely breathe. His power was almost gone, but the city behind him was still standing. The people inside were still alive. He reached out with his mind one last time. Not to destroy, not to defend, but to send a message. Drevkin was sitting in his command chair when the voice invaded his mind. "You made me a monster," Kael said. "A human made me remember I could choose to be something else. You think you are strong because you destroy, but you are weak. You are afraid of anyone who refuses to obey." Drevkin gripped his chair until his knuckles turned white. "Come face me, coward. Come finish what you started. Or run home and tell your masters that you lost to the garbage you threw away." The bridge was silent. Every officer watched their commander. Drevkin stood slowly. His face was twisted with rage. "Prepare my combat mech," he growled. "I will kill the traitor myself." In the ruins of New Chicago, Kael forced himself back to his feet. His body was broken. His power was fading. He had minutes left, maybe less, but Drevkin was coming. And this time, Kael would not run. The dropship descended through the smoke. A massive combat mech stepped out, 10 meters tall, designed specifically to kill Valkith warriors. Drevkin's voice echoed from its speakers. "You are already dead, traitor." Kael smiled through the blood on his face. "Perhaps, but not before you." The combat mech moved like a predator. Its metal feet crushed the broken street with each step. Weapons covered every surface. Cannons, blades, energy projectors designed to cut through psionic barriers. Drevkin had built it specifically to kill warriors like Kael. Kael stood his ground. His silver markings flickered weakly. His body trembled with exhaustion. He looked like a candle flame facing a hurricane. "You should have died on the torture table," Drevkin said through the mech speakers. "I should have cut deeper. I should have burned away every piece of your mind until nothing remained." "You tried," Kael replied. "It was not enough." Drevkin attacked. The mech launched forward with impossible speed. A massive blade swung toward Kael's head. He raised his hand and stopped it with a barrier of psionic energy. The impact sent shockwaves through the street. Windows shattered for 3 blocks in every direction. Kael pushed back. The mech slid backward, leaving deep grooves in the concrete. But Drevkin was already firing. Energy beams shot from the mech's chest. Missiles launched from its shoulders. Kael deflected what he could. The rest hit him directly. He flew backward and crashed through a wall. Pain exploded through every part of his body. He tasted blood in his mouth. His vision went dark for a moment. "Get up," he told himself. "Get up." He crawled out of the rubble just as the mech reached him. A metal foot came down toward his chest. He rolled aside at the last second. The foot crushed the ground where he had been lying. "You are weak," Drevkin laughed. Your power is almost gone. You cannot even fight back anymore." Kale stood again. His legs shook beneath him, but he would not fall. "I do not need power to beat you," he said. "I just need to survive long enough." "Long enough for what?" "Your human friends to save you." Drevkan grabbed Kale with the mech's massive hand and lifted him off the ground. Humans are insects. They cannot save anyone. They cannot even save themselves. He began to squeeze. Kale felt his ribs cracking. He could not breathe. Darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. Then he heard a voice. "Let him go." Grace stood in the middle of the street. She had no weapons, no armor, nothing but a desperate courage in her eyes. Drevkan turned the mech toward her. "What is this? The human mate?" He laughed. "Did you come to watch him die?" "I came to tell you something," Grace said. Her voice was steady even though her hands were shaking. "He is not fighting because you hurt him. He is fighting because I showed him what it feels like to be loved. That is something your empire will never understand." She walked toward the mech, step by step, closer and closer to the machine that could kill her with a single movement. "You think power makes you strong," she continued. "But power is nothing without purpose, without connection, without love." Drevkan hesitated. In Valdoran culture, the Vethkai bond was sacred. Even disgraced warriors were protected by its laws. To kill a bonded mate was the ultimate taboo. Grace reached the mech and placed her hand on its metal surface. She looked up at Kale, still trapped in the machine's grip. "I am here," she said softly. "Whatever happens, I am here with you." Kale felt something strange, a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with his failing power. Grace's presence was like a light in the darkness, like a heartbeat keeping him alive. The bond between them pulsed. It was not just a ceremony. It was not just words. Something real had connected them that day, and now it was waking up. Grace gasped as energy flowed through her. Not her own energy. She could feel Kale's power, his pain, his desperate will to protect the innocent, and Kale felt her. Her compassion, her courage, her stubborn refusal to let him fight alone. For a moment, they were not two people anymore. They were one being with one purpose. Kale's silver markings blazed white. Power flooded back into him like a tidal wave. Not just his power, theirs. He shattered the mech's grip and fell to the ground. Before Drevkan could react, Kale raised his hand and released everything. A wave of psionic force slammed into the combat mech. The metal twisted and screamed. Weapons exploded. Armor crumpled like paper. The machine fell backward and crashed into a building, completely destroyed. Drevkan crawled out of the wreckage. His armor was broken. His gray skin was covered in blood. He looked up at Kale with pure hatred in his eyes. "Kill me then," he spat. "Finish it, traitor." Kale looked down at the man who had tortured him, the man who had tried to destroy everything he cared about. It would be so easy to end it now. One thought, and Drevkan would be gone. But that was not who Kale was anymore. "No," he said. "Go home. Tell your masters what human love did to their greatest weapon. Tell them that mercy is not weakness. Tell them that connection is stronger than conquest." He turned away from his fallen enemy. "And tell them that if they ever threaten this world again, I will not be so kind." Drevkan stared in disbelief. Then, slowly, he retreated to a nearby shuttle and fled into the sky. The remaining Valdoran fleet saw their commander fleeing. They saw their warships destroyed and their soldiers scattered. Within hours, they turned and ran. The war was over. Kale collapsed into Grace's arms. His markings had gone dark. His power was almost completely drained. But he was alive. "You came for me," he whispered. "Of course I did." She held him tight. "You are my husband." He laughed. It was a weak, exhausted sound, but it was real. 6 months later, they sat on the porch of their little house, watching the sunset over the lake. Cale's power had never fully returned. He did not mind. He had never wanted to be a weapon. "Do you regret anything?" Grace asked. Cale took her hand and smiled. "I was sent here to die. Instead, I learned to live." He looked at her with eyes full of love. "How could I regret that?" Grace leaned against him. The stars were coming out now, the same stars he used to watch with such sadness. But tonight, they looked different. Tonight, they looked like hope.